Victoria Jackson, a successful judge on her way to a landmark meeting at the state Supreme Court, finds herself pulled over by a police officer for driving a luxury vehicle. What should have been a celebratory day takes an unexpected turn as she faces racial profiling and prejudice, highlighting the challenges that persist even for the most accomplished individuals. But when an investigative reporter arrives on the scene, the tables turn, and the officer's unjust actions are exposed to the world. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Victoria Jackson stood before the full-length mirror, her fingers deftly smoothing the fabric of her tailored blazer. The reflection staring back was a portrait of power, resilience, and grace. She scrutinized her appearance with a discerning eye, her natural curls neatly pinned back in a sleek, professional updo. The subtle makeup accentuated her rich brown skin, and the sharp, determined expression on her face had guided her through countless courtroom battles over the years. Today was not just any day, it was the culmination of decades of relentless hard work and dedication. Today is the day, Victoria murmured to herself, a small, victorious smile curving her lips as she reached for her briefcase resting on the bed. Supreme Court, here I come. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, interrupting her moment of reflection. She glanced at the screen and saw Marcus, her trusted assistant, had already checked in. "Morning, Marcus," she answered, her voice steady as she fastened her watch. "Good morning, Judge Jackson," Marcus replied with his usual calm efficiency. "Just wanted to see if you need anything before your big meeting today. I've got all the files ready for review as soon as you arrive at the office." "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate it. I'll be in by noon, but let's keep this under wraps for now, okay? We'll make some noise when the time is right." Marcus chuckled softly on the other end. "Of course, mum's the word. See you soon." Victoria ended the call and took a deep breath, casting one last look around her room. The plush furniture and gleaming wooden floors were reminders of the sanctuary she had created for herself. Every item in this room, every achievement she had reached, had been earned through tireless effort and an unwavering sense of purpose. Today was meant to be a celebration of that success. With her appointment to the state Supreme Court, she had shattered yet another barrier that stood in her way. The keys to her new luxury sedan jingled in her hand as she made her way to the door. The car was her reward, a symbol of the long journey she had traversed. As the engine roared to life, Victoria merged onto the highway with a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. Her fingers tapped rhythmically on the leather steering wheel, each beat reflecting her excitement and the gravity of the day ahead. She had prepared meticulously for this moment, with every detail carefully reviewed. Today she would meet with state leaders, discuss crucial judicial reforms, and set her vision in motion. As she drove through a more affluent neighborhood, the future seemed bright. She noticed the glances, initially subtle, then increasingly noticeable. An elderly couple walking their dogs gave her a prolonged stare. Soon, there were full-on double takes. It was a familiar, bitter experience, people's skepticism and unspoken judgments. The silent question of "what is she doing here?" that always seemed to follow her. She kept her eyes forward, determined not to let their scrutiny dim her resolve. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from her mother. "Hi, Mom," Victoria greeted warmly. "Victoria, are you nervous?" her mother asked immediately. Victoria laughed, a mix of pride and concern. "You always ask me that before a big day." "Well, this is different. The Supreme Court, my God." "Victoria, you're making history," her mother said, her voice filled with awe. Victoria's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, but a smile tugged at her lips. "I know, and I'm ready. I just need to get through this meeting." "I'm sure you'll do great. You always do," her mother assured her, her tone reassuring. "Thanks, Mom," Victoria said, her voice softening. Her mother had always been her biggest supporter, even in the face of adversity, even when the world tried to tell her that she didn't belong in spaces of power. "I'll call you afterward. Maybe we can celebrate tonight." "Drinks on me," her mother teased, laughter echoing as they ended the call. Victoria's spirits lifted once more. She was just moments away from a milestone in her career. A few more turns, a few more minutes, and she would be at the threshold of her future. But her thoughts were abruptly interrupted by flashing lights in her rearview mirror. At first she blinked in confusion, then frowned as the blue and red lights grew more intense. "Not today," she muttered, her voice laced with frustration. She eased her car to the side of the road, rolling her eyes at the inopportune timing. A police car pulled up behind her, and she sighed, retrieving her driver's license from her purse. The officer, a stocky man with graying hair and a weathered demeanor, stepped out of his vehicle, and approached her slowly. Victoria glanced in her side mirror as he adjusted his belt and swaggered up to her window, exuding an air of authority and suspicion. "License and registration," he barked, bypassing any pleasantries. Victoria handed over her documents, keeping her voice calm despite her growing anxiety. "Is there a problem, officer?" He scrutinized her, then glanced at the documents. There was a pause as his eyes flickered from her face to the license in his hand. "This your car?" he asked, his tone noticeably colder. "Yes," she answered evenly. "Is there a reason you pulled me over?" The officer took a step back and surveyed the luxury vehicle once more, his gaze lingering as if he were grappling with the incongruity of a black woman driving such a high-end car. It was as if he couldn't reconcile the image of her dressed for success, poised and driving a luxury vehicle with the world he believed in. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," he finally said, his voice laced with authority. Victoria's heart sank. She hadn't anticipated this. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I said step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated, his voice carrying an unmistakable command as his hand rested firmly on the holster of his gun. Victoria's heart pounded furiously in her chest, her mind a blur of anxiety and anger. Externally, she forced herself to remain calm, her voice steady as she responded. "Officer, I haven't broken any laws. Is there something specific you're stopping me for?" The officer's impatience was evident as he snapped. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for. A car like this was reported stolen just last week." A chill of dread crept down Victoria's spine. The truth behind his words was all too familiar, an insidious reality that had shadowed her life for years, lurking just beneath the surface of every interaction. The air between them seemed to grow thicker with unspoken tensions, the oppressive weight of prejudice and assumption. "I'm not stepping out of this car," Victoria said with a firm conviction, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel as if it were her lifeline. The officer's face grew stern, his initial suspicion giving way to a barely concealed aggression. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you cooperate." Victoria met his gaze without flinching, her voice cutting through the growing hostility. "I suggest you run my plates. This car isn't stolen, and I am not the person you're looking for." For a tense moment, the officer's jaw tightened, as if he were weighing his next move. They were locked in a silent standoff, each of them standing their ground. Finally, without uttering another word, he retreated to his patrol car. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Victoria exhaled sharply, her breath coming in uneven gasps as she fought to control her rising anxiety. The minutes stretched interminably as she watched him through her rearview mirror, his figure illuminated by the flashing lights of his car. He was on the radio, tapping away at his computer, and every second that passed was a mix of mounting frustration and palpable dread. This was more than just a routine stop. It felt like a personal affront, a reminder of the systemic biases she had faced throughout her life. As she sat there, her thoughts raced through the countless times she had faced similar judgments, moments when people questioned her right to be in certain spaces, her worth, and her legitimacy. Each instance had added to a growing burden of indignity and frustration, a relentless reminder of the prejudice that seemed to follow her no matter how successful or accomplished she became. When the officer finally returned, his smile was a thin, insincere veneer over his underlying irritation. "I'm letting you go this time, ma'am. Just stay out of trouble." The dismissive tone stung deeply. Victoria's anger surged, but she forced herself to swallow it. The urge to confront him, to demand an apology was strong, but she knew the futility of such an outburst. The consequences of speaking out in such a situation could be far worse than enduring the insult in silence. Instead, she took her license and registration from him with a curt nod and said nothing. As he walked back to his patrol car, Victoria's grip on the steering wheel tightened to the point of pain. The sense of violation and humiliation was heavy, clinging to her like a second skin. The experience was a stark reminder of the prejudices she faced, simply because she didn't fit the stereotype of someone who belonged in a car like hers in this affluent neighborhood. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of her strength and resilience. She wasn't going to let the ignorance of one officer derail her plans for the day. But as she resumed driving, doubts began to seep in. No matter how far she climbed, no matter what she achieved, would she ever escape the prejudiced assumptions and racism that seemed to shadow her every step? Would her success ever be enough to shield her from the prejudice that followed her like a persistent shadow? Victoria's grip on the steering wheel tightened further, her knuckles white. What had started as a promising day now felt overshadowed by the weight of systemic prejudice. Yet she couldn't afford to let this experience halt her progress. She had a critical meeting ahead, and she needed to maintain her focus and composure. Victoria Jackson sat in her car, her mind a whirlwind as the patrol car's flashing lights continued to swirl behind her. The brief and unsettling encounter with the officer had left her on edge, and she knew that this situation was far from over. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, observing the elegant houses lining the street, a stark reminder of the hostility that people like her often faced in such areas. Even a Supreme Court judge wasn't immune to the biases that lurked beneath the surface, she thought bitterly. Taking another deep breath, she tapped Marcus's contact on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. He picked up on the second ring, his voice steady but laced with concern. "Judge Jackson, is everything okay?" "No, Marcus. I need you to listen carefully," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I've been stopped by a police officer. He claims the car matches the description of a stolen vehicle. This situation is escalating, and I'm concerned about where it might lead." Marcus's voice rose in alarm. "You've got to be kidding me. Where are you?" "I'm near Forest Hill Drive, a residential area," she said, her eyes flicking to the officer through her side mirror. He was now stationed near his patrol car, likely running her plates. "I'll call the press," Marcus said decisively, already in action mode if this turns into something. "It's already something," Victoria interjected firmly. "Get Sophia Martinez involved. If anyone can ensure that the truth is documented, it's her." "I'm on it," Marcus assured her. "Hang tight. I'll get people on the ground." This officer won't be prepared for the scrutiny he's about to face. As Victoria waited, her mind raced with the weight of the officer's actions and the broader implications of his assumptions. The incident might have seemed like a minor disruption, but it was a stark reminder of the ongoing battle against racial prejudice and the importance of standing up to such biases. She was determined not to let this setback derail her resolve or diminish her accomplishments. The struggle for dignity and justice continued, and she was prepared to face it head-on, no matter the challenges ahead. Victoria exhaled sharply, the sound escaping her lips like a muted burst of frustration. "Thank you, Marcus." "Stay on the line," she instructed, her voice betraying a thread of the anxiety she felt beneath her calm exterior. As Marcus clicked off the call to make the necessary arrangements, Victoria's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, her knuckles growing white with the intensity of her grip. Her mind raced with a chaotic mix of anticipation and apprehension, each passing second seeming to stretch into eternity as she fought to maintain her composure under the mounting pressure. She cast a glance at the officer, who was still stationed by his patrol car, absorbed in the conversation over his radio. An air of discomfort now hung about him, a subtle but palpable shift in his demeanor. He hadn't anticipated her calm and collected response. He had expected to confront someone who might be flustered or panicked, but Victoria's serene presence seemed to unsettle him further. The officer's initial confidence appeared to wane as he continued to speak into his radio, clearly wrestling with the unexpected calm of his subject. Without warning, the officer, who Victoria could now identify as Derek Thompson from the name tag on his uniform, began walking back toward her vehicle with purposeful strides. His posture was stiff, each step calculated and deliberate, and his expression was a rigid mask of determination. It was evident that he was preparing himself for a confrontation. Victoria's heartbeat quickened in response to his approach, but she resolutely refused to allow her anxiety to show. "Stay calm, stay composed," she reminded herself quietly, but firmly, her resolve solidifying with each passing second. Derek knocked on the window with a force that was more than just a routine gesture. It was a deliberate signal of his growing frustration. Victoria rolled the window down slowly, the motion seeming to stretch out as she met his gaze with unwavering steadiness. "Step out of the car," Derek commanded, his voice low, authoritative, and tinged with irritation. "No," Victoria responded with equal firmness, her eyes locking onto his with an unyielding gaze. "I've complied with your request to provide my license and registration. I'm not stepping out of the vehicle until you provide a lawful reason for this request." Derek's jaw tightened, a visible sign of his escalating frustration. "You're refusing a direct order from a law enforcement officer," he said, his voice edged with annoyance. "Mom, I'm not refusing," Victoria replied evenly, maintaining her calm demeanor. "I'm asking you to justify this request." The street around them had grown noticeably quieter, the distant hum of city life fading into the background as a few curious neighbors began to peer out from their windows. The scene was drawing more attention, and Victoria could sense the tension escalating. Derek's patience was visibly wearing thin, and she noticed his hand hovering near his belt, a subtle but troubling indication of the possible escalation of the situation. "That's it," Derek snapped, his frustration now evident in his tone. "Step out of the car, or I'm placing you under arrest for obstruction. I suggest you think very carefully about what you're about to do." Victoria's voice remained steady, though a trace of tension was unmistakable. "My name is Victoria Jackson. I am a judge with the state Supreme Court, and I'm en route to an extremely important meeting. This situation is not going to end the way you think it will." Derek hesitated, a flicker of recognition crossing his face as he processed her name. However, his skepticism remained evident. "A judge," he scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "And I'm the President of the United States. Step out of the car before this escalates further." Before Victoria could respond, the sudden sharp click of a camera shutter cut through the tense air. She glanced to her right and saw Sofia Martinez, her camera already rolling, emerging from a sleek black sedan that had parked a short distance away. Sofia, known for her relentless intensity and unwavering focus, marched toward them with purpose, microphone in hand and her cameraman following closely behind. "Officer Thompson," Sofia called out, her voice ringing clear and authoritative, cutting through the tension. "What exactly are you arresting this woman for?" Derek spun around, his expression shifting to one of confusion and irritation as he took in Sofia's sudden appearance. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his frustration palpable. "I'm Sofia Martinez," investigative reporter Sofia announced, holding up her press badge for emphasis. "And I want to know what possible justification you have for detaining Judge Victoria Jackson, who is doing nothing wrong. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time." Derek's eyes flickered with a moment of recognition as he processed the name. He blinked, casting uncertain glances between Victoria and the camera now trained on him. The confidence that had characterized his demeanor began to falter, but he stubbornly attempted to defend his position. "She's driving a vehicle that matches the description of a stolen car," Derek said, his voice defensive. "I have every right to detain her until I confirm otherwise." "And have you confirmed it yet?" Sofia pressed, stepping closer with her microphone now directly in his face. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks like nothing more than harassment." Victoria remained silent, her gaze fixed on the unfolding drama between Sofia and Derek. She observed as the officer's bravado continued to erode under the relentless questioning. "I'm not discussing this further," Derek snapped, his frustration reaching a boiling point. "Step back and let me do my job." Sofia smirked, turning to the camera with a self-satisfied air. "You heard that right. Officer Thompson has no further justification but continues with this absurdity." Derek's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger, the situation spiraling beyond his control. "Look, lady, this isn't." Sofia's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Officer Thompson, are you aware that you're being recorded right now? Are you comfortable with the way you're handling this situation?" Derek's face flushed as he struggled to articulate a response, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Before he could manage a coherent answer, Victoria's calm yet incisive voice sliced through the heavy air. "Officer Thompson, I recommend that you run a check on my license plates to confirm that this vehicle is not stolen. If you do that, this situation can be resolved immediately, and we can all go on with our day without further delay." Derek stood there, his authority and pride now laid bare under the relentless gaze of Sofia's camera. The increasing number of onlookers, drawn by the unfolding drama, observed in silence, their eyes fixed on the scene with an air of anticipation. Derek, his jaw tightening with visible discomfort, turned back towards his patrol car, his silence speaking volumes about his reluctance to confront the situation further. Sofia and Victoria exchanged a glance, one that conveyed a mutual understanding. "We've got him now," Sofia's eyes seemed to say. Moments later, Derek returned, his face a mask of reluctant defeat. "It appears everything is in order," he said, his voice devoid of inflection, carefully avoiding eye contact with both Victoria and the cameras that had now focused intently on him. Victoria's eyebrow arched in a mix of skepticism and satisfaction, a slight curl of her lips hinting at her disbelief. "Of course it does," she replied, her tone laced with a hint of irony. Sofia, unyielding and determined, pressed on. "So, Officer Thompson, do you have any explanation for the detainment of a state Supreme Court judge without probable cause?" Derek's face reddened further under the scrutiny. "I was following protocol," he insisted. Protocol or profiling. Sophia's voice was sharp and cutting, each word landing with precision. Because that's what this situation looks like. I'm done here, Derek snapped, turning on his heel and making a hasty retreat. But Sophia was not finished. You might be done, Officer Thompson, she called after him, her voice carrying over the now quiet street. But this story is just beginning. I hope you're prepared for the headlines. As the officer walked away, clearly chastened, Victoria sank back into her seat, her body finally relaxing despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She glanced at Sophia, who remained focused, her camera capturing every moment of the aftermath. Thank you, Victoria said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia nodded, her expression serious. Don't thank me just yet. This is only the beginning, you know that, right? Sophia replied, moving closer to the car window. Victoria sighed deeply, rubbing her temple in exhaustion. Yes, I know. But today was supposed to be a good day. Sophia's face softened slightly, empathy evident in her eyes. It still can be. We're going to ensure that what happened here doesn't fade into the background. You deserve more than this. We all do. Victoria looked around at the crowd that was slowly dispersing, neighbors retreating into their homes. This was not the way she had envisioned being remembered, not like this. I've fought my whole life for moments like this, she murmured, her voice distant and reflective. For the right to stand here and be heard, and yet here we are. Sophia nodded in understanding, her gaze steady. Here we are. But your fight isn't over, Victoria, and neither is mine. Victoria sighed once more but managed a small, determined smile. Then let's get to work. Sophia flashed a reassuring smile at Victoria before turning her attention back to the camera crew as they methodically packed up their equipment. Marcus's voice crackled in Victoria's ear once more, the urgency palpable. Judge Jackson, I'm so sorry that this has happened. I've got news outlets reaching out for statements already. We need to control the narrative. Victoria took a brief moment to close her eyes, finding a semblance of calm amidst the chaos. I trust you, Marcus. Let's get ahead of this and make sure the truth prevails. With a deep breath, she shifted her car back onto the road, leaving behind the blinding array of flashing lights but not the heavy weight of the unfolding situation. The street felt unnervingly silent, the air thick with tension that seemed to press down on her like an oppressive fog. As she sat behind the wheel, her gaze fixed straight ahead through the windshield, her heartbeat was steady but her thoughts raced uncontrollably. The confrontation with Officer Thompson was far from over. Despite Sophia's arrival with the camera now focused on him, Thompson's pride and sense of authority were clearly at stake. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that Lipamaiber. Thank you for your valuable time. Victoria exhaled slowly, observing the officer as he made his way back to his patrol car. His eyes were darting nervously from side to side, scanning the growing crowd of onlookers who had gathered on the sidewalk. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, their collective unease palpable. This is going to spiral out of control if he doesn't back down, Victoria murmured under her breath. She had witnessed this type of situation before, how individuals like Derek Thompson often became more entrenched when faced with scrutiny, how their need to assert dominance could cloud their judgment and escalate matters unnecessarily. Sophia stepped closer to Victoria's window, her microphone held ready, speaking in a low, urgent tone. The press is all over this, Victoria. He's not going to back down without a fight. Victoria nodded, her grip tightening on the steering wheel as she absorbed the weight of Sophia's words. I understand, but we must prevent this from escalating any further. I'm not giving him any reason to escalate this situation beyond what it already is. She looked up, meeting Sophia's gaze with a determined resolve. Keep the camera rolling. We need to capture the truth as it unfolds. Sophia gave a firm nod, her expression resolute. Always. Suddenly, the car door swung open with a jarring tug, causing Victoria to flinch instinctively. She reached for her seatbelt, only to find Derek Thompson standing beside her, his face a mask of barely restrained fury. Out of the car now, Derek ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. Victoria looked up at him, her demeanor calm yet unyielding. Officer, I am not resisting, but you need to provide me with a lawful reason for detaining me. Derek's eyes flashed with irritation. You think you can just walk away from this because you're a judge? You think you're above the law? I'm asking you to uphold it, Victoria countered, her gaze unwavering. You pulled me over without cause. You threatened to arrest me without justification. And now, because you're losing control, you're trying to escalate the situation. Derek's jaw tightened, his expression shifting between anger and frustration. The air between them crackled with palpable tension. Victoria could almost see the internal struggle in his eyes. He was weighing the consequences of his next move, trapped in a situation where his authority and pride were on the line. Sophia continued to film, her camera capturing every tense moment, every flicker of emotion. The raw intensity of the situation was evident in every frame. Derek's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper as he reluctantly spoke. "Fine, get out of your car." Victoria opened the door slowly, stepping out with a composure that belied the gravity of the moment. She surveyed the scene around her, the once quiet street now a hive of activity, with the press mobilizing and the crowd's faces reflecting a mix of curiosity and concern. Sophia moved in closer, her camera following Derek's every move with precision. "This isn't over," she said to Victoria, her voice steady, "but we're going to make sure it ends the right way." Victoria took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation settle over her. Despite the turmoil, she was resolute in her determination to maintain her dignity and ensure that the truth was revealed. This wasn't just about her, it was about every Black person who had faced humiliation, wrongful arrest, or worse due to racial profiling. The stakes were high, and she needed to be a voice for them. Officer Victoria said softly, her voice carrying a note of quiet authority, "I'm offering you a way out. Check my credentials. Review my driver's license again. You'll see that I am exactly who I've claimed to be." For a fleeting moment, Derek hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, briefly obscured by his anger and frustration. Victoria saw a crack in his facade, but then he shook his head, dismissing the possibility of retreat. "I don't care who you are," Derek said, his voice hardened with resolve. With that, Derek reached into his belt and pulled out the handcuffs, their cold metal gleaming ominously in the harsh midday sun. The clinking sound of the restraint seemed to echo louder as he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "I'm arresting you for obstruction of justice." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock and disbelief. Victoria's heart raced, a surge of panic swelling in her chest, but she stood her ground, fighting to keep her composure. This was not the time to succumb to fear. Sophia's voice cut through the tension, sharp and resolute. "Are you seriously going to arrest a state Supreme Court judge in front of all these cameras? Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Derek's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting between Sophia and Victoria. The weight of his decision seemed to press heavily upon him. He took a deep breath, his expression a storm of conflicted emotions, before he growled out, "Get that camera out of my face." "No," Sophia shot back, her voice unwavering. "The world needs to see this." The air around them crackled with palpable tension, thick and electric, as if every breath was charged with the gravity of the moment. Derek stood there, the handcuffs dangling from his fingers, his chest rising and falling with barely contained fury. The crowd was silent, their collective breath held as they waited to see the outcome. Victoria, sensing the fleeting chance to diffuse the situation, spoke again, her voice steady and authoritative despite the circumstances. "Officer, this isn't just about me. This is about you. You hold the power to either de-escalate this situation or make it even worse for yourself." Derek's grip tightened around the handcuffs, his gaze locked on Victoria. The internal struggle was clear as day for everyone to see. He was a man on the edge, torn between his professional duty and the escalating situation before him. The battle raged visibly within him. Then, almost imperceptibly, his hand fell to his side. The handcuffs made a soft clink as they brushed against his leg. He took a step back, his demeanor shifting. "You're free to go," Derek muttered, his voice hoarse and thick with an undercurrent of bitterness that he couldn't quite hide. A collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd, the tension breaking like a long-held dam. Victoria sat still for a moment, trying to process the whirlwind of events. She didn't feel immediate relief. Instead, there was a heavy sense of injustice and the lingering fear of how close this situation had come to spiraling into something far worse. Sophia, though visibly shaken, lowered her camera but continued recording. She moved closer to Victoria, her eyes wide with a blend of awe and respect. "Are you okay?" Sophia asked quietly, her voice soft with concern. Victoria nodded, though her body felt numb as if she were moving through a fog of disbelief and adrenaline. "I will be." As Derek turned to leave, he was met with Sophia's unrelenting persistence. "Officer Thompson, do you have any comment on what just happened here?" Derek did not look back as he muttered, "No comment." Sophia pressed on, her voice firm. "This video is going to go viral, officer. The world is watching. Do you regret what you did here today? Derek spun around, his face flushed with anger and frustration. Regret? Do you think I regret doing my job? I don't regret anything, even after finding out that Victoria Jackson is a state Supreme Court judge. Sophia's voice sliced through Derek's bravado. For a moment, Derek was speechless, the full weight of the situation settling over him. The crowd continued to watch, the camera kept rolling, and now there was no escape for him. He clenched his jaw, his expression a mixture of defiance and resignation, before turning on his heel and striding quickly toward his patrol car. The crowd parted for him, whispers of speculation and judgment spreading like wildfire in his wake. Sophia captured every last moment of his retreat on camera, documenting the fall from authority. Victoria slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, her hands trembling slightly as she did so. She stepped out of the car, standing tall despite the oppressive weight of the moment. Sophia was immediately by her side, offering silent support in the aftermath of the confrontation. "This isn't over, Victoria. We need to make sure people know what happened here," Marcus said, his voice laced with frustration and urgency. "I know," Victoria replied, her tone steady but with an edge of determination, "and we will." As the crowd that had gathered slowly began to disperse, Victoria could still feel the weight of the lingering gazes, the neighbors who had peered cautiously from behind their curtains, the passers-by who had stopped to witness the scene unfold. Every one of them had seen the truth laid bare today, and she knew that what had transpired wouldn't be confined to this quiet suburban street for long. Word would spread, and the ripples would reach far beyond this place. Victoria turned to Sophia, her eyes ignited with a determined fire. "We have to make sure this changes something, Sophia. This can't just become another incident that fades into the background like all the others." Sophia met her gaze and nodded, her camera still aimed and recording. "I'll make sure it doesn't," she promised, her voice carrying the weight of their shared mission. They stood in silence for a moment, the gravity of what had happened settling in the space between them. It was clear that this was no longer just about one encounter, one wrong act. It was about something much bigger. It always had been. The entire system was at stake, and Victoria felt the burden of that realization pressing down on her shoulders. But instead of weighing her down, it reignited the fire within her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been in her shoes, for every person who had ever been unjustly targeted. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Victoria took a deep breath, her hands clenching together as if to anchor herself amidst the swirling storm of emotions. The air around her was thick with tension and a palpable energy she could almost taste. Officer Derek Thompson, the man at the center of this confrontation, was retreating to his patrol car, but she knew the tension between them was far from resolved. It was just beginning. The press had arrived. Reporters with cameras and microphones had rushed to the scene, ready to capture the moment and broadcast it to the world. The growing storm was no longer just a local spectacle. It was about to go national. Marcus appeared suddenly, hurrying toward her, his face lined with concern. "I got here as fast as I could," he said, his breath heavy with both worry and urgency. "What's going on?" Victoria turned to him, her face composed, but her eyes couldn't hide the burden of everything that had transpired. "It's escalating, Marcus. This isn't just about me and this officer anymore. It's about everything people like him represent, about the system that allows this to keep happening." Marcus's eyes followed Victoria's, landing on Officer Thompson, who now stood rigidly by his car, his face a mask of discomfort. The officer was aware of the cameras pointed in his direction, capturing every moment of his frustration and unease. He was losing control of the situation, and everyone could see it. "Did he?" Marcus began, but the words stuck in his throat, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was about to say. "He tried to arrest me," Victoria said, her voice slow and deliberate. "For nothing. Just because I was driving my car in this neighborhood." She gestured toward the sleek black sedan behind her, a clear symbol of what had set the entire incident in motion. Marcus clenched his fists, his anger barely contained. "This has to stop. We need to get this story out there fast. People need to know what happened." "I know," Victoria replied with a nod, though her voice carried a note of caution. "But we need to be careful. I don't want this to turn into a media circus. We have to stay focused on the message. This can't just become another spectacle." Sophia approached her camera crew in tow. "Victoria, The footage we've captured, it's powerful. This is going to make waves, I can feel it." Victoria took a deep breath, her mind racing with the possibilities. "It can't just be another viral video, Sophia," she said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. "It has to mean something. We need to make sure this leads to change." Sophia's expression was serious as she nodded. "I get it. But we also have to make sure people see the truth of what happened here. The world needs to know." Victoria cast a glance toward Officer Thompson, who was now speaking hurriedly into his radio. His face had flushed with frustration, and it was clear that the weight of the cameras and the growing scrutiny was getting to him. He was trying to regain control of the narrative, but Victoria knew it was slipping through his fingers. She could feel it. "He's going to try to turn this on me," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "He'll say I was uncooperative, that I escalated the situation." "Let him try," Sophia said, her voice sharp and defiant. "We have the footage. He can't rewrite the facts." Marcus was still fuming, his eyes fixed on the officer. "He won't be able to talk his way out of this. Not this time. We'll make sure of that." Victoria's gaze hardened as she looked down the street where neighbors had stood, silent witnesses to everything that had unfolded. Today wasn't just about her. It was about justice. It was about holding those in power accountable, and it was about making sure that no one else would have to go through what she had. This was just the beginning, and she was ready for the fight ahead. Victoria nodded once more, though her mind had already drifted elsewhere. She had seen this play out too many times before. She understood all too well how, even with the truth firmly on her side, the narrative could still be manipulated and turned against her. She knew how quickly the media could spin a story, how easily the public's attention could be diverted away from the core issue. Lost amidst the constant barrage of sensational headlines, her mind raced with these thoughts until a voice snapped her back to the present. Derek had finally turned his attention back to her. He was walking over, his posture stiff, his expression hardened as though preparing for a confrontation. His face was set in a grim mask, and his voice, when he spoke, was clipped and formal, as if trying to reassert control over the spiraling situation. "Judge Jackson," he began, his tone edged with an attempt at authority, "I need to clarify a few things before we proceed any further." Victoria's gaze was steady, her expression unreadable, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "I'm listening," she said, her voice cool. Derek hesitated, his resolve wavering for just a moment as the weight of the cameras and the growing crowd pressed in on him. The cameras were rolling, and he was grappling with how to frame his words under the scrutiny of so many eyes. Finally, he spoke. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said, his tone a mixture of frustration and defensiveness. "The vehicle you were driving matched the description of a stolen car. We had reason to believe." "I'm fully aware of what you believed," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp yet calm, like the crack of a whip. "But believing something doesn't justify escalating the situation the way you did. You had my documents. You knew exactly who I was." Derek's jaw tightened, his frustration mounting. "With all due respect, Ma," he said through clenched teeth, "I was following protocol." "Protocol?" Victoria echoed, her voice rising slightly, incredulous. "Protocol would have been to verify my license and registration, which you had right in front of you. Protocol would have been to treat me with dignity, instead of assuming I didn't belong here based on nothing but the color of my skin." The crowd had grown eerily quiet, each person fixated on the confrontation unfolding before them. Sophia's camera zoomed in on Derek, capturing the faint flicker of unease that crossed his face, betraying the carefully controlled expression he was trying to maintain. "I don't have time for this," Derek muttered under his breath, casting a glance at the ever-growing crowd around them. "This whole thing is being blown out of proportion." Blown out of proportion, Marcus stepped forward, his simmering anger finally boiling over. "You tried to arrest a Supreme Court judge based on nothing but your prejudiced assumptions, and now you want to say this is blown out of proportion." Derek's face reddened as the situation spiraled further out of his control. "I didn't know who she was," he blurted out, the defensive edge in his voice betraying his discomfort. "You shouldn't have to know who she is," Marcus shot back, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "Every citizen deserves respect, regardless of who they are. But you didn't see a citizen. You saw a black woman behind the wheel of a nice car, and you jumped to the conclusion that she must be a criminal." Derek's hands balled into fists at his sides, his frustration palpable. "I was just doing my job," he said through gritted teeth. No, Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife, quiet but devastating in its intensity. "You weren't doing your job. You were abusing your power, and now the entire world is watching." A wave of unease washed over Derek's face, the bravado slipping as he glanced at Sophia, her camera still trained unrelentingly on him. She took a step forward, her lens capturing every flicker of emotion. "Officer Thompson," she said, her voice calm but relentless, "do you have any comment on your actions today? Is there anything you'd like to say about the way you handled this situation?" Derek opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked from the camera to the crowd and then back to Victoria, his confidence crumbling under the weight of their gazes. For the first time, he seemed cornered, like a man realizing he had no more moves to make. "I don't have anything to say," he finally muttered, turning sharply on his heel and marching back to his patrol car. The crowd murmured in a low buzz as they watched him retreat, shoulders hunched, his defeat written in every step. Sophia's camera stayed trained on him, capturing the exact moment he slammed the door of his patrol car and sped away, leaving behind the wreckage of his authority. Victoria stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. She had won this battle today, but deep down, she knew that the war was far from over. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Later that evening, she sat alone in her office, the setting sun casting long, somber shadows across the room. The events of the day weighed heavily on her, a mixture of victory and frustration churning in her mind. Despite everything that had unfolded, she couldn't shake the feeling that justice had only been half served, that the deeper systemic issues remained unresolved. The phone on her desk buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. It was Marcus. She picked up the phone, her voice quiet and reflective. "The footage is already going viral," Marcus said, his voice steady but concerned. "The networks are picking it up. People are talking." Victoria leaned back in her chair, a sigh escaping her. "What are they saying?" she asked, though she already had an idea. "There's a lot of support," Marcus continued, "but you know how this goes. Some people are already twisting the narrative, claiming you were uncooperative, saying that you escalated the situation." Victoria closed her eyes, the familiar sting of frustration washing over her. She had expected this, yet somehow it still hurt. "Of course they are," she said quietly. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Marcus spoke again, his tone soft but resolute. "We need to stay ahead of this. I've scheduled some interviews for you. Nothing too heavy, just enough to keep the focus on the real story." "I appreciate that," Victoria said, her voice weary. "But I'm so tired, Marcus." "I know," he replied gently. "But you're not in this fight alone. We're with you. Always." Victoria forced a smile, though the warmth never quite reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly before hanging up the phone. She stood still for a moment, staring at the city skyline beyond the large window. It was early evening, and as the sun began to set, the city below lit up, a web of light stretching out across the horizon. It was a beautiful sight, but it did little to calm the storm in her mind. The battle wasn't over, not even close. There were still so many challenges ahead, but for now she allowed herself a brief moment of peace, a rare opportunity to exhale. She had won today's fight, but tomorrow would bring a new one. It always did. There. Victoria was sitting in the green room of the television studio, her fingers lightly drumming on the armrest of her chair. The past few days had been a whirlwind, non-stop interviews, press conferences, and public appearances. Her face had been all over the news ever since the confrontation with Officer Derek Thompson. What had started as a routine traffic stop had escalated into a national conversation about race, authority, and the abuse of power. Now she was about to sit down for her highest profile interview yet, one that millions of people would be watching. Marcus, her publicist, sat next to her, his eyes glued to his phone as he scrolled through the latest news updates. "It's everywhere," he muttered, not looking up. "The video has gone viral, and people can't stop talking about it. This is your moment, Victoria." She gave a small nod, her expression calm, though her mind was anything but. She had done countless interviews before, but this one felt different. The weight of it pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. The world wasn't just watching to hear her recount the events, they were scrutinizing her every move, waiting to see how she would handle the pressure. The expectations were suffocating. "They're ready for you in 5," a production assistant said as she popped her head into the room. Victoria stood up, smoothing the front of her tailored blazer. She glanced over at Marcus. "What's the latest? What are they saying out there?" Marcus sighed, finally putting his phone down. "Same story, mostly. A lot of support, especially from the Black community, but there's the usual backlash too. Some are claiming you escalated the situation, saying you were being uncooperative. And then there are the trolls, always looking for something to tear apart. Victoria felt a familiar sting of frustration. She had prepared herself for this. She knew that no matter what, there would be people who tried to twist the narrative, who would paint her as the villain instead of the victim. But even knowing it didn't make it any easier to swallow. "Let them talk," she said quietly, her voice steady but weary. "They always do." Marcus leaned forward, his tone soft but filled with conviction. "Listen, you've got this. You've been through worse. Just stay calm, stay focused, and remember, this is your opportunity to shape the conversation. I don't let them define the narrative for you." Victoria nodded, but inside her thoughts were racing. She had spent the past several days going over every detail of this interview, rehearsing her answers, and preparing for every possible question. But now, standing on the precipice of it, the doubt crept in, tightening its grip on her chest. She had to be more than just calm. She had to be flawless. The bright studio lights were almost blinding as she stepped onto the set. She could feel the intensity of the cameras as they zoomed in on her face, every detail magnified for the world to see. Her heartbeat quickened, but her expression remained composed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. The interviewer, a well-known journalist, greeted her with a warm smile and gestured for her to sit down. "Judge Jackson, thank you so much for joining us today." "Thank you for having me," Victoria replied, her voice steady, though the nerves simmered just below the surface. The interviewer wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "The video of your confrontation with Officer Derek Thompson has gone viral, and it's sparked a nationwide debate about racial profiling, police misconduct, and systemic racism. Could you walk us through what happened that day from your perspective?" Victoria took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself to recount the story she had told so many times before. "I was on my way to a meeting when Officer Thompson pulled me over. From the moment he approached my car, it was clear that he didn't see me as a person of authority or respect. He saw me as a threat, simply because of the color of my skin." The interviewer nodded, her expression serious. "Many people have pointed out that you're not just a judge, but a Black woman in a position of power. Do you think that played a role in how Officer Thompson treated you?" "Absolutely," Victoria said without hesitation, her voice gaining strength. "Throughout my career, I've faced challenges that others haven't had to deal with. Despite my title, my achievements, and my status, I'm still viewed through the lens of racial bias. That's the heart of the issue. It doesn't matter how successful I am or what I've accomplished. What matters to people like Officer Thompson is how society has been conditioned to see people who look like me." The interviewer leaned forward, clearly invested in the conversation. "Do you think this incident has opened up a larger conversation about the way Black people, particularly Black women, are treated in this country?" Victoria paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I think it has. And I think it's about time. This isn't just about me or what happened to me. It's about the countless people who experience this kind of treatment every day and don't have a platform to speak out. This moment is bigger than me. It's about changing a system that's been broken for far too long." The interviewer leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly, an intensity in her gaze as she carefully chose her words. "There are those who say you escalated the situation, that you were uncooperative with Officer Thompson from the moment he approached you. How would you respond to those claims?" If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 6 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Victoria felt the familiar knot of frustration tighten in her chest, her jaw clenched ever so slightly, but she willed herself to stay composed. This wasn't the time to let her emotions show. "It's the same narrative we see every time something like this happens," she began, her voice measured but firm. "The victim is blamed. They say we should have been more compliant, more polite, more passive. But the truth is, I followed the law. I handed over my ID, my registration, everything Officer Thompson asked for. And yet, despite doing everything right, I was still treated like a criminal. The problem isn't how I responded, the problem is how I was treated. Asking for respect, asserting my rights, standing up for myself, that's not escalation, that's survival. It's about protecting my dignity when the system is trying to strip it away." The interviewer listened carefully, her expression unreadable, though there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She leaned back slightly, taking a moment to absorb Victoria's words before asking her next question. Your experience has brought renewed attention to the issues of racial profiling and the urgent need for police reform. It's become part of a much larger conversation across the country. What do you hope will come from this, from the story you shared? Victoria paused, her mind racing. This was her opportunity not just to tell her own story, but to speak for all the others who had been silenced, those who didn't have the same platform or visibility. Her voice softened, but her conviction was unmistakable. This isn't just about what happened to me. I'm just one person who had the privilege of being able to speak out. But what about the countless others who don't have that? What about the people who experience this kind of injustice every day and are never heard? This is about a broken system, one that allows racial bias to thrive and strips people of their dignity and humanity based on the color of their skin. What I hope is that this moment sparks real, meaningful reform. I want accountability. I want transparency. I want justice not just for people like me, but for everyone who has been ignored, who has been told they don't matter. We can't just keep talking about these issues. We need to act. We need to address the racism that's built into our institutions and create a system that truly protects everyone equally. That's the goal. That's what I'm fighting for. The interviewer's face softened and her voice grew more reflective as she spoke. Judge Jackson, your words have touched so many people. Your courage and determination have brought these difficult conversations to the forefront in a way that's impossible to ignore. We're grateful for your time today and for sharing your story with us. As the interview came to a close, Victoria felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done what she set out to do. She had spoken her truth and laid everything bare. Now it was out of her hands. Walking off the set, she made her way to the green room where Marcus was waiting, his eyes full of admiration. He immediately wrapped her in a hug. You were incredible, Victoria. Every word you said was powerful and on point. You handled that perfectly. Victoria smiled, though it was a tired smile. The weight of the interview, the weight of everything she'd been carrying, was beginning to settle into her bones. I just hope it was enough, she replied softly, her voice betraying the exhaustion she felt. It was more than enough, Marcus assured her, his voice full of confidence. People are listening. You're making them listen. The two walked out of the studio together, the crisp evening air a welcome contrast to the heat of the spotlight she had just stepped out of. Victoria inhaled deeply, letting the coolness of the night around her. She had faced more than just a belligerent officer that day. She had faced down a system that had long tried to silence her, a narrative that had been spun over and over again to discredit people like her. But she had refused to back down. She had stood tall, spoken her truth, and now all she could do was wait and see what would come of it. As they reached the car, Victoria's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down to see a text message from her mother. I'm so proud of you. A soft smile tugged at her lips, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. Her mother had always been her biggest supporter, and knowing she had made her proud filled Victoria with a quiet sense of satisfaction. It had been a long and difficult road to get to this point, one filled with more obstacles than she had ever imagined, but she had made it. And now she was determined to keep fighting for the justice that so many deserved but so few received. As she and Marcus slid into the car, Marcus turned to her, his voice low but full of purpose. What's next? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Victoria stared out the window for a moment, watching the city lights blur into a kaleidoscope of colors as they drove. The future felt uncertain, but one thing was clear: she wasn't finished yet. Next, she said quietly, her voice steady, we keep going. We keep pushing. We don't stop until there's real change. Marcus nodded, his expression full of admiration and resolve. We don't stop, he echoed, his voice filled with determination. Victoria leaned back in her seat, her mind already racing with thoughts of the next battle, the next fight she would have to take on. This was just the beginning. The road ahead was long, and the challenges would be great, but she was ready. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. Not when there was still so much work left to do. This fight wasn't just for her, it was for every person who had ever been silenced, every person who had been told their voice didn't matter. She was fighting for them, and she wouldn't stop until they were all heard. The echoes of Victoria's interview reverberated through every corner of the media landscape, transforming into a tidal wave of public discourse. Her words, raw and powerful, were replayed, dissected, and analyzed on every major network. Commentators debated, legal analysts weighed in, and social media erupted in passionate discussions. The footage of her encounter with Officer Derek Thompson, already etched in the national consciousness, continued to spark outrage across the country. News outlets ran the clip on a loop, ensuring that the image of Victoria's confrontation remained at the forefront of everyone's mind. But for Victoria, watching from a distance as the world debated, questioned, and finally began to grasp the gravity of her experience, there was little solace. As the media storm raged on, she understood with unwavering clarity that this was only the beginning of a much longer, harder battle. Seated in her office, Victoria stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her inbox was overflowing with emails, messages pouring in from all corners of the country. Supporters sent notes of encouragement, expressing solidarity and admiration for her courage. Others, full of anger and frustration, voiced their own stories of injustice as if her struggle had unlocked a floodgate of shared pain. And amidst it all were the voices of hope, those who believed in the possibility of real, systemic change. The sheer volume was overwhelming, but Victoria could feel the weight of the moment. Each message represented not just a personal note, but a cry for action, for change. People weren't merely looking for answers, they were searching for someone to lead, challenge the status quo, and stand firm in the face of a deeply flawed system. The soft creak of the door pulled her from her thoughts. Marcus stepped in, his face a mixture of concern and quiet determination. He glanced at the papers strewn across her desk, articles, transcripts, and opinion pieces documenting the explosion of interest her story had ignited. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently, his tone heavy with understanding. Victoria sighed, rubbing her temples as if to fend off the stress threatening to consume her. "It's a lot, Marcus," she admitted, her voice carrying a trace of weariness. "I didn't expect it to blow up like this, at least not this fast." Marcus moved to sit across from her, his expression softening. "It was always going to be bigger than the incident itself," he said, his voice low but resolute. "You've become the face of something much larger than just that night." Her eyes drifted to the window, watching the city move outside. "I never asked for that," she murmured. "I just wanted to be seen for who I am, not turned into a symbol." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I know, Vic," he said, using her nickname to soften the moment. "But people are looking for leadership. They're desperate for someone who can speak the truth and make the powers that be listen. Right now, that's you." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her eyes closing briefly as the weight of his words sank in. The pressure was immense, almost suffocating. She hadn't asked for this responsibility, but now that it had found her, there was no avoiding it. Deep inside, she knew Marcus was right. There was no turning back now. "You're right," she finally said, her voice quiet but resolute as her eyes opened. "But how do we keep this from becoming just another headline that fades away? How do we turn this into something lasting?" Marcus' eyes lit up with determination, his voice unwavering. "We build on it," he said, leaning forward. "This moment is bigger than any one story or interview. We use the platform you've been given to push for real, tangible change, police reform, accountability, and a national conversation on systemic racism. This isn't about one bad cop. It's about the entire system." Victoria nodded slowly, the enormity of the task ahead looming large in her mind. "But how?" she asked, the question lingering in the air. "How do we make that happen?" Marcus smiled faintly, a glimmer of optimism in his eyes. "You've already started, Vic. Every time you speak, you're pushing the conversation forward. Now, it's about staying the course, more interviews, speeches, working with lawmakers, partnering with activists. There are people ready to stand with you, but you need to lead the charge." Victoria exhaled slowly, the weight of expectation settling onto her shoulders, but with it came a renewed sense of purpose. "Then let's get started," she said, her voice stronger, more determined. That evening, Victoria attended a packed community event, the energy in the room palpable as local leaders, activists, and community members gathered to discuss the ongoing fight for racial justice and police reform. The air buzzed with emotion, hope, anger, frustration, and a shared resolve to see change through. Conversations spilled over in heated debates, personal stories of injustice were exchanged, and ideas for reform were passionately discussed. As Victoria entered the room, the conversations hushed, all eyes turning toward her. She could feel the weight of their collective expectations pressing down on her. But with each step, her confidence grew. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much larger. The crowd parted as she made her way to the front of the room, their respect for her evident in the quiet awe that followed her movements. In the back, Sofia Martinez, the journalist who had been following Victoria's journey since the incident, stood with her camera lowered but poised. She had become a silent witness to Victoria's rise, capturing every crucial moment. Their eyes met across the room, and Sofia offered a nod of encouragement, a small but powerful reminder that Victoria wasn't alone in this. Standing at the podium, Victoria's heart raced, but her voice was steady as she began to speak. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, her gaze sweeping the room, meeting eyes filled with both pain and hope. "We are at a critical moment in our nation's history, a moment where the truth about our justice system, our policing, and our society is being laid bare for everyone to see." She paused, her words hanging in the air before continuing. "What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger, deeply entrenched pattern of systemic injustice that has plagued our communities for generations. But this is not just my story. It's the story of countless individuals who have been silenced, marginalized, and made to feel as if their lives do not matter." The crowd, nodding in agreement, seemed to pulse with a shared sense of purpose. "We can no longer afford to stay silent," Victoria pressed on, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's not enough to hold one officer accountable or issue public apologies. We must demand real, lasting reform. We must demand a system that protects all of us, not just the privileged few." As her words resonated throughout the room, it felt as if a collective energy surged. The fire of activism had been reignited, and it was burning brighter than ever. Marcus, standing quietly off to the side, watched with pride swelling in his chest. He had always believed in Victoria's strength, but seeing her command the room with such conviction made him realize just how powerful her voice had become. "This was just the beginning. It's just the beginning. I am committed to this fight," Victoria declared, her voice clear and unwavering, each word echoing with a fierce determination that resonated throughout the room. "This isn't just about me. This is for every single person who has been unjustly targeted, for every family who has mourned a loved one lost to violence and injustice. We are in this together. And together we will change this system." Her words hung in the air like a rallying cry, igniting the energy of the crowd. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 7 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Applause thundered in response, a wave of support surging forward, electrifying the atmosphere. Faces beamed with encouragement, some teary-eyed, others nodding in agreement, as if they had waited a lifetime to hear someone speak these truths aloud. As Victoria stepped down from the podium, people surged toward her, their words a mixture of gratitude, shared pain, and promises of solidarity. One woman, her voice trembling with emotion, whispered, "Thank you, Victoria. You speak for all of us." More followed, men, women, young and old, each with a story of their own, each offering their help for the battle still to come. A man pressed her hand into his, squeezing it as he said, "You've given us hope again in the midst of it all." Sophia moved gracefully over the crowd, her camera capturing every moment, the lens an unblinking witness to the gathering tide of resistance. "Victoria, that was powerful," Sophia said as she approached, still filming. "People are listening to you." Victoria managed a small, tired smile, though the weight of her words and the enormity of the fight ahead still sat heavily on her shoulders. "I hope so, Sophia. We can't afford to lose this momentum. Not now." "You won't," Sophia reassured her, her voice full of conviction. "I'll make sure this stays in the spotlight. The world needs to see what's happening here, what people are rising against." As their conversation continued, Victoria's gaze swept over the room, but then it halted, her eyes narrowing slightly as she spotted a familiar figure lingering at the back. It was Officer Derek Thompson. He wasn't wearing his uniform tonight, yet his presence was unmistakable. His posture was stiff, and his face wore an expression she couldn't easily read, but there was a tension in the air that rippled out from where he stood. For a moment, everything else fell away, the noise of the crowd. The steady hum of chatter, it all faded as Derek slowly began making his way toward her. The room seemed to grow quieter with each step he took, the energy shifting from electric to uncertain. "I didn't expect to see you here," Victoria said when he was close enough, her tone measured but cautious, as if weighing the possibility of his presence being either a threat or a truce. Derek hesitated, his hands twisting together as if searching for something to hold on to. I came to listen," he finally said, his voice low but sincere. "I came to understand." Victoria raised an eyebrow, skepticism curling in the back of her mind. "And what did you hear?" she asked, her words sharp but controlled, probing for the truth behind his sudden appearance. Derek's gaze flickered, and for a moment, vulnerability washed over his features. "I heard the truth," he admitted, exhaling as if the words were harder to say than he had anticipated. "I've spent my career believing in this system, believing that I was doing the right thing, upholding the law. But now, I don't know anymore. I've seen too much, and I've heard too much tonight." A silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken history and the raw emotions simmering just beneath the surface. The crowd, sensing the shift, stood still, watching as if they too were holding their breath. Victoria studied him closely, searching for any hint of insincerity or hesitation. Derek's face was taut, his shoulders slumped as if burdened by more than just the weight of the conversation. "I want to make things right," he said softly, his voice cracking just enough to reveal the depth of his inner struggle. "I know I can't change the past or undo the harm that's been done, but I want to help. I want to be part of the solution." For a long moment, Victoria said nothing. She had every reason to doubt him, to turn him away, to believe that his words were just another empty promise in a world full of them. But there was something in his eyes, something fragile yet earnest, that made her pause. "If you mean that," she said slowly, her voice steady but firm, "then you'll have to prove it. Words won't be enough this time. If you're serious, you need to show that you're committed to real reform, and that means action." Derek nodded, his expression solemn. "I understand, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Victoria watched him as he turned and walked away, the crowd parting silently to let him pass. She felt a swirl of emotions churning inside her: anger, hope, doubt, and the faintest glimmer of possibility. It was a small step, but perhaps, in the larger fight for justice, it could lead to real change. As the evening pressed on, the energy in the room reignited. Conversations buzzed with renewed vigor, stories and strategies shared between strangers who were now united by a common cause. From all walks of life, people had come together, their differences dwarfed by the larger battle they all knew lay ahead. And though Victoria was acutely aware of how far they still had to go, for the first time she felt a genuine spark of hope. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a collective movement, and together, their voices were growing too loud to ignore. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Now that you've heard Victoria's story, let's take a moment to reflect. What have you learned so far? What's one thing from this story that resonated with you? And how will you bring it into your own life? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories and important discussions.